Picture a quiet suburban neighborhood in Georgia. A mother is found brutally murdered inside her own home. At first, her teenage twin daughters tell a story. They say they just got home from school and found this horrific scene. But as investigators started digging, they realized the real story was so much more complex, so much more tragic. It was all rooted in years of anger, violence, and a family that was just desperate for some kind of stability. So let's get into it.
And that's really the question at the heart of this entire story, isn't it? The case of Nikki Whitehead and her 16-year-old identical twin daughters, Jasmia and Tasmia. Everyone called them Jazz and Taz. It's a story about a mother who was trying so hard to reconnect, and two daughters who felt like their whole world was being ripped away from them. To really understand what went wrong, we've got to go back to the beginning of all this conflict.
So let's rewind a bit. When Nikki was 31, she was finally in a good place. She was in a stable relationship and felt like she was ready to be a full-time mom. You see, she had her daughters when she was really young, so they were mostly raised by their great-grandmother, Della. But now, Nikki wanted to build a new life, bring her 13-year-old girls home to live with her and her partner in this nice, gated community. It was supposed to be a brand new start for all of them. But for Jazz and Taz, this wasn't a fresh start. It was an earthquake. You have to understand, they didn't really know Nikki as a mom. To them, their great-grandmother Della was their mom. Nikki was more like a distant aunt or something. Their whole life, their friends, their school, it was all built around Della's house. So this idea of moving in with a woman they barely knew, well, they fought it, and they fought it hard. But, the move happened anyway. Nikki got custody. And for the very first time in their lives, the twins had to follow strict rules. Nikki was terrified they'd make the same mistakes she did as a teenager, getting into the party scene, having a baby young. She saw them heading down that road and was just determined to pull them back. And this is where things just completely ignited. From Nikki's perspective, she was finally being a parent. She was setting boundaries to protect her kids and keep them from repeating her past. But the twins, they saw it as total hypocrisy. They knew all about their mom's past, and they felt like she had absolutely no right to suddenly start laying down the law. In their eyes, the party girl was trying to control them, and they were having none of it. The change in the girls was immediate. It was drastic. People who knew them said it was like a complete 180. These were smart kids, good students, but their grades just started to tank. They became angry, withdrawn, and worst of all, that anger started to get physical. And it didn't take long for arguments to turn into something much worse. Whenever Nikki would set a rule they didn't like, they would physically attack her. The fights got so bad that Nikki had to call the police on her own daughters, again and again. The whole house was just descending into chaos. And this is where a really terrible pattern started to form. After a really bad fight, Nikki would sometimes just give in and send the girls back to live with Della. She probably thought she was de-escalating things, but what she was actually doing was teaching them a devastating lesson. If you get violent enough, you get exactly what you want. You get to go home. Violence became their escape hatch. And I want to be clear, this wasn't just a bad few months. This destructive cycle, the girls move in, they get violent, they get sent back to their great-grandmothers. This went on for 2 solid years. 2 years of police calls, court dates, and this family just tearing itself apart. Of course, with all the assaults and police calls, the courts got involved. Eventually, the whole family was ordered into counseling. They reportedly saw up to 6 different therapists over those 2 years. Everyone was desperately trying to figure out how to stop the violence and fix what was so clearly broken. And one of the professionals involved said something that is just so telling. It paints this picture of a family that had gotten so used to the fighting that the chaos itself became their normal. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for their part in it, which just created this endless loop of blame and anger. So after years of this back and forth, a counselor made a huge recommendation. They basically said that the constant moving between the two houses was the real problem. It was creating all this instability. They argued that the best thing to do was for the girls to live permanently with their mom, with Nikki. And that decision brings us to January 2010. A judge listened to that professional advice and granted Nikki full custody of the twins, who were now 16. They were ordered to move back in with her right away. And that one decision, it set the stage for the final tragic confrontation. The tension in that house went through the roof almost immediately. Nikki didn't just make them move back in, she pulled them out of their high school and enrolled them in a new one. She tried to throw a welcome home party that ended when one of the twins got violent and shoved an aunt. In just that first week, the police were called to the house, twice. And to make this incredibly tense situation even worse, Nikki's partner, who owned the house, was a truck driver. He was on the road for work. So that left Nikki completely alone with her two furious teenage daughters in a house that was basically a pressure cooker about to explode. And that leads us to January 13th, 2010. It was just over a week after the Krolls had been forced to move back in. Any fragile peace that might have existed, well, it was about to be shattered for good. So imagine this. A sheriff's deputy is just doing his normal patrol through the neighborhood when suddenly Taz comes running out of the house, screaming, flagging him down. She's frantic. She tells him that she and her sister had just gotten home from school and there was blood everywhere, and their mother, Nikki, was dead inside. The deputy follows her in and finds what he later called an absolute horror show. Nikki Whitehead, the 34-year-old mother who had fought for 2 long years to have a family with her daughters, was dead. The painful, violent cycle had finally reached its heartbreaking end. And that just leaves us with the one question that hangs over this entire awful story. The system knew. The counselors, the judges, the police, they all knew how bad things were in that family. And yet, somehow, it wasn't enough to stop what happened. And you just have to wonder, what could have been done differently to save Nikki Whitehead's life?